Hi there, I'm Ian Willoughby and you're very welcome to episode 4 of Czech Next Wave. This is a podcast produced jointly by the Czech Centres Network and Radio Prague International, where the aim is to introduce the world to very talented young Czechs. And my guest this time, Marek Šindelka, one of the country's leading young writers, certainly fits that bill. Marek is known for acclaimed novels such as Aberrant and Material Fatigue, and has also won domestic prizes for his poetry and short stories. And there's more. His broad oeuvre also includes graphic novels, while movie scripts that he's written should hopefully reach the big screen in 2021. Enjoy my conversation with Marek Šindelka now in this episode of Czech Next Wave. The first thing I'd like to ask you is, I was reading that when you were growing up, you lived in Křivoklát, which is one of the Czech Republic's best-known castles. How did that come about? What was it like living in a castle as a teenager or a kid?
Yeah, I grew up at the castle, but actually you get used to it very, very fast. Actually, I was a child, so for us with my brother, it was like a huge playground. With all those fountains and attics, for example, we were like spies in this world. The police had sometimes to come because we put some alarm on or whatever. And we were fishing for those coins people used to throw in those water basins. There was this fountain, and then we used to swim there, and with a magnet we were like fishing for those coins, and then that was great. These are my memories of living at the castle, like those as a child, taking advantages of this world. Like it was full of tourists, so we sometimes we played some games, like we pretended to be beggars in rags and so on and so on. So it was mostly about how to get some money from tourists. And we also played badminton in our living room. It was so huge because we lived directly in the castle, so the rooms were so huge, so we were able to play badminton in our living room, so that was great also.
And your mum was the castle warden, is that correct?
Exactly, yeah, she was a warden, but I don't feel any imprint of this experience in my writings. For example, it wasn't like that romantic for me or something.
When you got to the stage, I presume in your teens, when you became a serious reader, who were the writers you most looked up to?
I started with Czech poets like Josef Topol, the father of Joachim Topol and Philip Topol. And his poems were very influential for me. It was a huge impact, like on my view of the world. Like I suddenly realized how powerful it is, like literature and poetry especially. And of course, Czech poets like Seifert and Hrubin. Hrubin was one of my most favorite writers. His poems are they are like stories. It's a very epic, and I guess I was very influenced by his writings. But the interesting thing is that I hate reading because my mother was, she was an intellectual, so she pushed us to read. She pushed us we've always had a big library and full of those beautiful books. But I, as a revolt or whatever, I just didn't read until I was, I guess, 14 or 15 years old, and actually I fell in love with a girl. And she was a reader. She was a big reader, and this was ignition of my the initial spark of my reading experience. Like that was it.
You started out as a poet, Marek, or at least your first book was a collection of poems, Strychnine and Other Poems, for which you won the prestigious Jiří Orten Award. Why did you make the switch from poetry to prose? I don't know if it was a complete switch, but generally, why the change?
Well, I think it was very natural move or switch because I've never made a distinction between those two genres. Actually, for me, it's like there is sort of an osmosis through those two genres or two worlds, because my poems were very epic, same as Rubin's, and my prose, or at least critics usually describe it as very poetic and full of, metaphors and so on and so on. Sometimes I guess many of my poems are more actually prosaic than most of my prose, maybe. and so for me it was something very natural. For example, the book I published after my first book, which was a compilation of poems, a volume of poems, that was a novel, but very experimental one. It was soaked with poetry, and it started as a poem. Actually, it started as just a small haiku-like poem. And then it was like a snowball effect. Like its gravity somehow worked and attracted other pieces of text, and then it grew to this monster of a novel, and it was full of poetry.
And your first novel, The Mistake, it's about a Czech flower smuggler who takes an extremely rare and valuable plant to Prague from Japan. Where did the original idea come from? I know you say it began as a poem, but where did the original germ of the idea come from?
It was triggered by a small, or I don't know if small, but an accident that took place in New Zealand when two Czech scientists tried to smuggle a couple of rare plants, and it was an international, they were forced to stay there, or I'm not sure if they went to jail, but there was a huge problem with this, and because those plants were very expensive and protected by international laws, and I was somehow fascinated by this, and then started to research those things, because it happens with flowers, with rare species of insects and lizards, and so on and so on, and immediately I had this idea of a young guy smuggling something of this kind from a continent to continent, and that was the starting point. And then I wrote the poem I mentioned, the very small one, and after that I rewrite it, the whole thing as a short story, and this short story again evolved in something bigger, and so on and so on. That was a very strange process.
Also, last year you brought out another version of the novel. You kind of rewrote it. So for the readers, which is the correct version? What's the real version of The Mistake?
It's a good question, yeah. As I said, it's a monster of a book for me, because it was my first prose, it was my first novel. So I don't know, it's sort of an obsession, because I still can't live with this text, but I have to, and it's so deep rooted, and that's probably a good expression, because the book has roots, because it's so vivid, so you can see how it started as this seed I mentioned, as this small poem, and it was like an evolution, like really like growing a plant or something dangerous, some disease maybe. I used to call it a literary cancer, like all this text, because it created or has created metastases and so on and so on. It was like a disease almost, and we also remade it as a graphic novel. And after that, I wrote the second version of the novel. So it's crazy for readers, and I'm sorry for this, but it must be very confusing. But for me, the best is the last one. And we will see in the next version, of course.
One of your best-known works is Oeuvre Material Fatigue from 2016. It's a story or stories of two brothers who are refugees who reach Europe from the conflict, I guess, in Syria. How did you go about creating those stories? Was it based on research or was it purely imagination?
It was based on very thorough research. I felt that it wouldn't be possible without that. But in certain point, I realized that I had to change the strategy. I realized that I didn't want to do it as a documentary or a newspaper article or whatever, which was back then in 2015. It was everywhere. And I decided to do it as again more to go deeper in those characters, to do what literature is capable of doing, like to grab you and take you inside some other person's skin, like it's possible. And so I eventually I wrote it as a fiction based on very thorough research. I met people from Syria and Afghanistan and so on and so on, but I realized I couldn't use their stories like just without any corrections and so on and so on. So I just took some inspiration from their lives and their journeys, because it was all about this journey to Europe. And I was very afraid how because it was skating on a thin ice, on a very thin ice, because it was the main characters, the protagonists of the book are from a different culture, from a completely different background, and with a complete different background. And let's say a reward for me was that the book was translated to Arabic and published in Syria, and my translators, they told me that it worked when they were translating the book, and that was great. It was better than all the prizes and so on the book received. That was the best. Like it worked.
I was surprised that the book hasn't been translated into English, but apparently it's been quite successful in some other countries, for example, in the Netherlands. Why do you think that is, or why is that simply?
Well, it's incredibly difficult to get your books translated into English. It's a very closed world for us Czech writers, and I'd say writers from all the Eastern countries, because I guess they have enough great writers from all the former, English empire all over the world, and we are on the margin of this. Even our best writers, they struggle to get their books translated. And if they succeed, it's usually in a small publishing houses, and still it's a little bit, they go under the radar in the English-speaking world. So it's very difficult. And for example, it's very difficult also to get your books translated into French, but it happens sometimes. But English is like a fortress, and I don't know why exactly.
You also work in film, and you studied screenwriting and dramaturgy at FAMU. What kind of movies do you work on, or what kind of movies have you worked on?
I do scripts or write scripts for living. Like that's my, because it's impossible to live just from writing in the Czech Republic, unfortunately. So I have to combine those two things. And I've worked on a couple of, let's say, art house movies. One of them was with Martin Mareček. He's a documentarist. We had this idea to create a feature film. It would be his first feature film, but it turned to be a documentary in the end, because it was based on the real character, a businessman who had his background in all this new age philosophy and so on and so on. And he somehow used his skills and his charisma and so on and so on in his business, and it was very interesting. And we made, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we made maybe 5 versions of the script, and in the end we decided, or like we saw that it was impossible to do it that way. So he made the film Dálava, and it was very well received after that. And it was a very simple documentary about a father and a son, and and nothing of my work was there, but it was still great experience. And now 2 films are in production, which I wrote scripts for them, and I guess they will be in cinemas the next year. And we are also working with my colleagues, again with Martin Mareček, the director, and with Wojciech Mašek, with whom I wrote the script for the graphic novel Saint Barbara, Svatá Barbora, and we somehow continue on the work on this theme because we are going to do a series about this strange case of Saint Barbara, or Barbora Škrlová.
I'd like to ask you, do you think that your film writing in any way kind of feeds into your literature? Because one thing I've noticed about your writing is you seem to like brevity. Your novels aren't so long that I've seen. You've got a couple of short story collections. Even your sentences seem quite short sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. It depends on the. I usually try to not to force the text somewhere it doesn't belong. I'd say maybe half of my work is to find usually a suitable form for it, how to use and bend language and how to use it because it for me it's the main machinery of this all of a novel, of a short story, and even of a poem. You have to find a proper form, and of course, from film, I've learned many things from script writing. It's like bare bone structure. It's something without all those metaphors, ornaments. Especially for me, I'd say it's very good lesson because I usually use many metaphors and many those strategies which are, let's say, very deep rooted in the literature itself. But this can teach you how to build those structures without any of those things on the surface, but the inner skeleton of your work, which is inevitable. You have to deal with this. You have to somehow deal with this problem always. How to start it, how to develop it, how to end it, and that's it. That for me it was really valuable experience, studying at FAMU.
Well, Material Fatigue, the beginning is kind of like a movie because you're dropped into the action. It's already started before the reader arrives, so to speak.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. When I was writing the book, I had a couple of, let's say, strategies. I decided to write it as almost like a computer game. When you are cast in a environment and you have to orientate yourself, you have to look for something vital, and I wanted the readers to be there in the situation, like to observe all the environment and the surrounding of the main character with him. I wanted them to breathe with him, and I wanted their hearts beat with his heart. Even maybe it's too close to bear, it's almost unbearable. So it's not a pleasant book, I'd say, for many readers, but it was on purpose. Yeah.
You mentioned that you co-wrote this graphic novel, Svatá Barbora, Saint Barbara, about Barbora Škrlová, this strange woman who emerged at the center of this notorious child abuse case here, I don't know, like 12, 13 years ago or something, who had been passing herself off as a child. And it's a very complicated story. I think listeners should Google it if they want to know more about it. But what attracted you to this subject?
It was so strange. It all started with conversations with my friend Wojciech Mašek, with whom I wrote a script before that one. Yeah, we go for a coffee sometimes, and that was one of our big themes. We were fascinated by this. So when it happened, and after that we kept on talking about this case. Media were obsessed by this because it was so complicated. It was like a Hollywood blockbuster, with many of those plot points and then the revelations of new wonderful or exciting shifts in the story and so on. And but it was so complex, so huge, the structure. In the end, I guess just a few people still orientated themselves in the case because it was so complex and it was like an internet of characters. So we didn't know actually how to tell the story. We had this idea to let's do it. Let's write a graphic novel, because we immediately knew that the graphic novel would be a good genre or a good medium for this, because you can use the shifts in identity and so on. So a visual medium is capable of presenting this. And so we decided to do a graphic novel, but we didn't know initially how. And that was maybe the reason why it took us so long. We spent maybe 6.5 years doing the graphic novel. Eventually, we found it, but the process was rather crazy. It was like a nightmare, but it was like adapting a nightmare into a book. So that fits, maybe.
What's next for you, Marek? I know you told me you have 3 kids, including a 3-month-old, so you're busy. But on the literary front, what's next for you?
Well, I've been writing a new novel for maybe 3 years now. It's again a long process. I started actually in Scotland 3 years ago when I was there at the residency. It was and it was nice because it was again at the castle Hawthorne, then near Edinburgh, like maybe 30 kilometers from Edinburgh, and it was just beautiful. I felt like if I returned to my childhood or something, because again a castle, it was locked there. And the special thing about this was that there wasn't an internet connection. Even the phone signal was so weak that you had to go up on a hill there, so I was completely cut off all those distractions, and I could focus just on my writings, and I was able to start a new novel. Like maybe I did maybe 150 pages. I had never been that productive, so it was really great. But when I came back to the Czech Republic, it was over. It was so depressive. I wasn't able to to connect to those energy flow or whatever it was, and so I got stuck. And in months and months, I wasn't able to start the engine again. And then I wrote something in my another residency in Brussels, but then this crazy idea of rewriting the book, the mistake, chyba, came, and it ruined again everything. So now I'm trying to continue in this work, but I guess it will take another year, maybe year and a half. I don't know. We will see.
I was speaking there to the writer Marek Šindelka, and I should point out that we referred several times to his book or books, The Mistake, which I discovered after we spoke was published in English for the first time under the title Aberrant, so very sorry about that mistake. But I hope in any case you've enjoyed listening to our conversation on this edition of Czech Next Wave, which is produced by the Czech Centres Network and Radio Prague International. The podcast features very talented young Czechs, and our music was produced by one of their number, the great and Grammy-nominated keyboard player Ondřej Pivec. This has been episode 4 of Czech Next Wave, so if you've just joined us for the first time, why not also check out the earlier editions and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. But for now, from me, Ian Willoughby, thank you very much indeed for listening, and speak to you again soon.